So I'm just going to run through some different lighting scenarios. The first one we're going to look at is feathering a light, and that is something we're going to play with this afternoon. Now, I mentioned before about that little softbox and how you can achieve a softer light, and that is by feathering. So looking in that lighting diagram there, you can see the position of that light in relation to the subject. It's placed out in front, and it's actually not angled at the subject, it's angled across the front of the subject. So if I'm the subject, the softbox is placed here rather than angled back at me like this. That produces the softest light possible because we're working with that light that's kind of just filtering around as it comes out the front of the softbox. Because no matter whether you've got an internal diffuser or a single diffusion layer like we do here, if you're angling it straight back at the subject, some light is going to be fairly direct from the flash head and come straight out the softbox. And that's going to increase our shadows, make them a bit darker. But once we've got it out in front like this, we're relying on that light that's kind of bouncing around off this kind of internal the side of this softbox here and bouncing out at a different angle, which is going to be softer. But we can also really control and go the opposite way by placing the subject at the very front edge of the softbox. And that's going to give us a much stronger, more contrasty shot. So almost a low-key shot. So that's something that we'll play with this afternoon. Who's heard of Rembrandt lighting? So Rembrandt is, the name comes from the style of painting, from the painter Rembrandt, of course. It refers to that triangle of light on the shadow side of the face. So it lights up the eye and just creates that little triangle on the cheek. And apparently Rembrandt used to paint in a studio with a very high, small window, and where he positioned his subjects it naturally would create that little bit of light on the opposite side. Our Rembrandt lighting is coming from our front light, which is in this case a little beauty dish. But we've also added just some rim lights to provide separation from the background and light up the hair and the shoulders. So that can be, used in any combination as a single light source or in combination with other light sources. So cross lighting is using two lights. Again, in this case, a little beauty dish as our main light on the subject's face. But because he's turned into the light now, we've gotten rid of that Rembrandt lighting and it's lighting his face quite flat. And our second light, placed behind the subject and angled back, just creates that little bit of a separation and lights the shadow side of his face. So butterfly lighting is another common one, especially in kind of beauty type and fashion. So it's placed above the subject and angled back down directly onto the face. So the only real shadow you get is under the nose, and the name came about because some people thought that the shadow looked like a butterfly. The other thing it does is bring out cheek definition if they've got sort of sharper jawline and so forth. So you can soften those shadows just by putting a little reflector underneath as well, and kicking a bit of light back up underneath the chin. So clamshell lighting is another fairly common one for doing beauty, really soft kind of lighting. So you're basically placing two lights facing each other, one facing up, one facing down, and the subject kind of just stands back between them. So where I talked about that feathering before with the light placed in front of the subject and the light sort of just lighting the subject that's kind of hitting around the ether here, you get that from this setup here, but from two lights. So you get an even softer light because the one from the bottom is filling in any shadows. So that's a really, really soft, pretty light. Not something you typically use for a male because you want to bring out some of the features and have a bit of shadow in a male. But yeah, great for females for filling in shadows and making them look super pretty. So short lighting is terminology we use when we're lighting our subject from the opposite side to the camera. So if we look at our subject's face in this example here, the side that's closest to the camera is the side that's in shadow. And we're lighting the opposite side, which is the short side of the face, because it's the side that we see the least of from the camera's perspective. So it's really great for people with a kind of really round face because it makes them look thinner. Compare that to our broad lighting, and it's basically the opposite. We're lighting our subject from the front, and we're lighting that side of the face that is predominantly shown to the camera. Quite often we're using a bigger light source here that wraps around to the other side as well, or we're using a reflector, so we get minimal shadow with that. So in this situation, it does suit people with, a slimmer face. If you were to use this lighting setup with someone with a really, really round face, it's gonna kind of exaggerate that a little bit. So this is our side or split lighting, where we split the person right down the middle of the face. We're lighting one side and not the other. So again, this is common with males and less common with females. You can soften that shadow just by using a reflector. So you can see in that shot there is light bouncing back into the shadow side of his face. It's not totally black. So rim lighting is where we light the subjects from behind and don't have any lights from the front side. You can use a reflector to bounce some light back in and get some detail happening, but typically it's just lighting that edge of our subject. So hence the rim light. So this is really kind of important for providing separation from a dark background. And it can be used, like in that example earlier, with a front light, say lighting the face, and the rim light's just lighting the edges to give that separation. Or in this situation for, things like maternity or artistic nude, it's a really great lighting style for just highlighting the shape of the body and not providing, too much light on the camera side, which is showing all the detail. All right, so today we are going to start experimenting with just feathering the light. And we're going to use some shots with and without the reflector. We're going to see how we can achieve really, really soft light just with the one softbox. But also, just by changing the position of Ashley in front of that softbox, we can create a really low-key, dark sort of image as well. And then we're going to use it, our main light, as in a typical kind of situation with a rim light for our 2-light setup. And then we're going to add a background light to our 2-light setup. So we've got 3 lights in total. And that's just going to give us that little bit of extra separation from the background. And then we're going to finish up with our high key setup. High key is one that sort of some people struggle with because you really have to be quite accurate with your exposure to make it work.